Latch the windows, lock the doors, and put the kids to bed. It's time for another episode of
Tales from the Garage.
Hey folks, I'm back. It's a bit cold in here. Of course, it doesn't help the fact that I always wear my shorts and my flip-flops when I'm out here. But this time I actually have a shirt that has sleeves on it at least. So now only my legs are freezing. It's cold out here, but I don't think it's cold as the last two times I recorded videos here. Now, tomorrow, Sunday, they're predicting it's going to hit a high of 60. But if I were to wait for that to happen, it probably wouldn't happen. And I do prefer to do these at night, though it's hardly evening, though. It is starting to get dark out here because it's late afternoon, I guess you could call it. And I just didn't want to wait. I didn't want to rely on the fact that it's supposed to be warmer tomorrow, because it may be warmer out and not warmer in here. Who knows? It's very strange. But coming out here today, I did think that, it's actually, I'm cold. I do have a cup of hot tea here, and I have my little candle lit behind me. Though that's small enough, that doesn't really help. So, is this the last one for the year out here? I don't know. Probably, but I just wanted to do another video anyway on a Saturday, and not really rely on what the weatherman says. And who knows? I might sleep through the warmth tomorrow, and I might wake up in the evening and it's 30 degrees again. Because I know we're supposed to also get snow within the next week or so. So here I am, and going to do another vinyl pull. And who knows, it could be the last vinyl pull of the year. So let's hope we pull some good ones out. And hopefully some ones that I have some memories of. Because there's, the stuff that I put back there is totally at random. And like the last time I pulled vinyls, a lot of them, the Eric Dolphy stuff, the Elvin Jones album, I hadn't heard in ages, and only to discover that the Elvin Jones one actually is up in full on YouTube, and I got to listen to it for the first time in over 30 years. It's a pretty good album, considering I didn't have or don't yet have the compact disc of that. Okay, so I'm just going to do some random vinyl pulls here. Ooh, at least I got long sleeves on this time. I thought I had pulled out all my Charlie Bird albums, but I guess I haven't. This is probably maybe the third Charlie Bird album I bought. Forget the first one, which is a live trio album, recorded in 1979, and I forget the name of what that one was. That was my introduction, and probably the best introduction to Charlie Bird. Here's one called Bluebird, also a trio. I recall that the second album of his that I pulled out, and I could picture the album cover, and I can't ever remember the titles, but it has a parrot on it. That one had a lot of orchestral string embellishment and stuff like that. So for a lot of people, that could have been, I love it, but could have been considered an easy listening album. And Charlie kind of, even within the same time period, kind of bopped back and forth between small group things and things with some heavy orchestration, especially strings on. This one would have actually been the album, this is recorded in August 1978, so this would have been the album that came out prior to that live album that I showed at some point in one of my earlier videos. That was recorded in the summer of 79, I believe. And this one, once again, is a trio, but the studio recording, no added arrangements or strings or horns or anything like that. And it's strictly Charlie Bird on his nylon string guitar, Wayne Phillips on drums, and Joe Bird, who is Charlie Bird's brother, on bass and vocals. I believe Joe Bird is still alive. I don't remember. There's not a lot of vocals on here. There might be one track, and they do a thing called Saturday Night Fish Fry by Louis Jordan. I think that might be the track that has the vocals on it. I remember liking this one, but once again, this is one that I don't have on CD. And I kind of forgot about it, to be honest. So this is one that I wouldn't mind having on CD. Nice studio recording, especially at the time. You know, recording a classical guitar in a live concert setting was fairly difficult to get a decent sound. Though with the album that came out a year after this, which was a concert album, the guitar was recorded incredibly well. But still, I think studio recordings, especially for nylon string guitars, especially in the case that you've got a bass and drum accompaniment, you've got a rhythm section there, are best done in the studio. And this has a lot of tracks on 11 tracks. There's a lot of, and this is good, you know. This is one that I don't think is in print right now. It's on the Concord Jazz label. Concord Jazz is around, but lately they've really been ignoring for the most part, their jazz catalog, which is what they really started and established themselves on, and have gone in a more pop direction. And the stuff that you find on Concord that's available now and in print and on CD, for instance, is more of the pop stuff. And they've allowed too much of their back catalog to really just go dead, basically. I bought this at Discomat, brand new, for $4.99, if you can imagine that. So I probably bought this, I would guess, probably around $79 or $80. But a lot of fairly well-known tracks. Now, Charlie Bird was probably the guy that recorded more Antonio Carlos Jobim tracks than just about any other artist. He was a big fan of Jobim's. And in fact, Charlie Bird albums are where I heard my first Antonio Carlos Jobim compositions. And that spurred me on to pick up some of Jobim's own albums. This one, let me see. I don't think he actually does any. Yeah, he doesn't do any Jobim tracks, which is a bit unusual. But I think this might be a concept album in that he does a lot of very well-known tracks. Ain't Got Nothing But the Blues by Duke Ellington. Rodgers and Hart track, This Can't Be Love. Irving Berlin track, Isn't This a Lovely Day? As I mentioned before, Louis Jordan's Saturday Night Fish Fry, the very famous Fats Waller composition, Jitterbug Waltz. Another Irving Berlin track, Soft Lights and Sweet Music. George and Ira Gershwin track, Nice Work If You Can Get It. And Duke Ellington's It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing. So a lot of fairly conservative mainstream jazz things that don't actually have very much of... Actually, there's none of the Brazilian kind of composers, bossa nova thing that Charlie was really instrumental in bringing into the U.S. in the late 50s, early 60s. So this is a bit of a departure that he doesn't have that Brazilian Latin thing going on so much, like the Jobim music that he loves so much, which is just about, say, most of his albums, certainly a lot of his albums have Jobim and have that kind of soft, delicate Brazilian touch to them. So that one's a bit of a departure. I like that. I wish I had that on CD. So I'm going to pick up another one. Another guitarist. And another small group session. Here's another one that I don't have this yet on CD, but I bought this new. I remember when this came out, this was another Discomat, though this was a couple years later because this was $6.99, so the prices were going up for vinyl. This was recorded live at the Village West in New York City in November of 1982, so it would have came out in 83. That's when I would have picked it up. Ron Carter, upright bass, and Jim Hall on guitar. I guess they did a few albums together, just a guitar and bass duet. Jim Hall on his electric guitar, Ron Carter on his upright bass. Actually, they're walking down the street there, and in the distance, that would be in New York, but in the distance, you could see what's like a very tall apartment building. If I'm assuming correctly, I think what you're seeing over there is actually Jersey. I think that tall building there is a hotel, and I think that's it's over in New Jersey. It's not that far from where I live, or where I used to live. If I'm assuming that the camera is aimed in the right direction, which I think it is. I think there's a little body of water there, and I think that's Jersey on the other side that you see off in the distance. Fine album, live album. But even when Carter and Hall did studio albums, I don't think they used any overdubbing. So basically, everything was live that they did together that I'm aware of. And from 82, oh man, that's a long time ago now. I remember when this came out. This is another one I would love to have on CD, and this is another, oddly enough, another Concord Records. This was on CD, but I'm willing to bet, I wonder if Concord let this one go out of print too. Got 8 tracks. Again, a lot of very well-known, just about everything on here is pretty much a standard. With the exception of there's one Ron Carter original called New Waltz that he recorded in different settings, because that title sounds very familiar. I have a lot of Ron Carter solo albums, so I think New Waltz was recorded in a number of occasions in a larger band, like a quartet with piano. But there's Baubles, Bangles, and Beads, the standard Laverne Walk by Oscar Pettiford, the bass player, another George and Ira Gershwin. So there's a theme here with the last album. Embraceable You by George and Ira Gershwin. Sonny Rollins' very famous piece, St. Thomas. Thelonious Monk's Blue Monk. Jerome Kern, Oscar Hammerstein's All the Things You Are. And Milt Jackson, the vibraphone player from the Modern Jazz Quartet, Bag's Groove, which was a song that was already popular, but Miles Davis recorded that in the 50s, probably on more than one occasion. Good album, I remember. You know, these are two masters, and to hear them play live, it's something special. Or it was. Jim lasted a long time. Jim had a nice long life and very prolific recording career. And for a guy as old as he was and steeped in the tradition that he would have grown up with, the music that he was inspired by, which was music from like the 1930s and the 40s. He was very progressive, and his albums, he almost always tried to do something different on his solo albums, different band settings, different instrumentation. And the last few years of his life, I was kind of amazed in a way that he was still going. And I know he wouldn't be around for long, but he recorded pretty much right up until the end, and he left a real wealth of albums. I mean, he's got so many albums out there. And I naturally have albums of his that I prefer over others, but I've never heard a bad one, a clunker. He just didn't make them. And I think for most people, the only difference between the ones that you like better than others might be, your own preference for the type of music or the band settings that you may or prefer over others. Okay, let me do another one. Well, we hit on an ECM one. And I pulled this out right from the same section that I pulled out the Ron Carter and Jim Hall, and I was a little worried that I was going to pull out another Jim Hall album, or maybe even Ron Carter. But I took a chance and I pulled out an ECM. Another one that I bought when it came out, of course, because he's one of my favorite composers in the world, Eberhard Weber's Chorus album from recorded September 1984. Would have come out in 85. I was already a long time fan. And strangely enough, this one has the ECM Records German address on there, and it's printed in West Germany. And it looks like this one was actually like distributed here in the U.S. as an import. Strange that I don't, it says right on the back of the album here, also available on compact disc. Well, 85 was about the time that I switched over to compact discs. So I'm a little surprised. This again might be one of those last vinyl albums that I bought before switching over to compact disc. Or maybe again, as has been brought up, I don't know how prevalent and easily available maybe the compact disc version would have been in 1985 when this album came out. Simply because I know, like for the pop stuff, you still had album, cassette, and CD in 1985 in terms of formats, and the CDs would have been certainly there for the pop stuff, but for the more esoteric stuff that didn't sell as well, I don't know if the compact disc would have been right there. I mean, I certainly have this on compact disc now, and I have for years. This is an unusual, at this time, as Eberhard Weber basically did like 3 types of albums. He did the solo bass albums, which didn't really start until after this, where he pretty much played all the bass parts himself. Prior to that, he had 2 kinds of albums. He had a jazz group albums where he would gather a group of musicians, whether it was a quartet, a quintet, whatever it was, and he would have themes and write all his own original music. But they would play like a jazz band. They would play the themes, and people would have various solos and that kind of thing. So there was a lot of improvisation. And then Eberhard also had the things that were maybe a bit more uniquely him, and that was his, I called them compositional albums, like The Following Morning and Fluid Rustle, which they may have had a little bit of improvisation on there, but the main part of it, certainly time-wise, was taken up by the actual compositions, and there may have been somewhere in the compositions little areas for like a vibraphone solo, say in the case of Fluid Rustle, or piano solo in the case of The Following Morning. This one kind of falls into the category of his compositional albums, though there is also, again, maybe a slight bit more than his other compositional albums, space for soloing. But it's unusual that it's a basic band augmented by other musicians playing written parts. So it's a little bit like, maybe like Carla Bley's Night Glow album, where she did the same thing. But the basic band is a 3-piece with Ralph Hubner on drums. I think wasn't he the drummer on the very first, The Colors of Chloe, the very first Weber album? And this was the first time that he would have played with Eberhard since then. And Eberhard plays bass and synthesizer, mainly because there is no keyboard player on this. I want to show his wife's artwork, Maja Weber's artwork again, and Jan Garbarek on soprano and tenor saxophones. And I know Jan Garbarek gets a bit of solo space in here. This is, I think, the only time that one of the synthesizer parts, oddly enough, replicates kind of like a very simple bass line at one point, which is strange because Weber's a bass player. And I think it's sequenced, which is the only time that I would have heard that in Eberhard Weber's music, where he himself wrote a kind of sequenced part. It's strange. It's a very simple part, and it's a section, just like 2 bass notes that repeat over and over, which leads me to think it's a sequenced synthesizer thing. And that's the one section that I know Jan Garbarek does play like a saxophone solo over. Though, additionally, there's 2 additional musicians that are playing essentially parts that are written out. And I don't know how this was recorded. I'm kind of guessing that they may have done the the basic recording with Ralph Hubner on drums and Jan Garbrick and Eberhard Weber, and then maybe had the kind of similar to the way a lot of the CTI records used to be in the 70s or late 60s, where they would have a jazz group, quartet, quintet, whatever, go in and play, and maybe after the fact add the charts, the horn and string charts. So there's 2 additional musicians on here that are playing written out parts, and they're once again they're kind of from what I recall essentially at the beginning and end of the pieces, more so than throughout the entire pieces. But they do a great job, actually. They add a lot of color to what might get to be maybe a little bit too empty sounding if they weren't there. And so there's Manfred Hofbauer, who plays clarinet and flute parts that were written out, and Martin Kunstner on oboe and English horn. So there's horn charts, but don't think of it in terms of jazz. It's more like they play it kind of like in a classical style, kind of like a background coloration type of thing. And it's interesting. I must admit, this isn't one of my favorite Weber albums, but I do still listen to it, and it's interesting because it's a little bit different than the other things he's done. And I listened to it from the kind of point of view of a 3-piece band with those 2 additional musicians augmenting it with that coloration on the horns that they play. And again, now that I pulled this, I do want to hear it again. So I'll probably go play the CD, which I do have. And once again, the late Maja Weber doing some more character pictures, as she did all of his album covers up until her passing. She did all of Eberhard's covers. I got time. I'm going to pick out one more. Wow. Yeah, here's one that I was looking at not that long ago because I haven't heard this for ages. Here's another one, not ECM, that I have not heard in ages, and I really want to hear it. I must have bought this. This was $7.49 at Discomat. I must have bought this in the like 84 or so. It's a 1981 album on CBS. This is actually I think this is the only actual group album I have by the Heath Brothers as the Heath Brothers. I have a lot of things where they were working as sideman with other people's groups individually. And I was looking at this one not that long ago because I don't have a lot of recollection of it except for it's 1981, kind of a funny period for jazz. And I think jazz, even the traditionalists in jazz, were trying to not completely sell out, but maybe update their sound a bit. And this is really before, you have to think this is really before the quote-unquote smooth jazz thing came along. So it wasn't jazz rock, but there was an element. And if you know the Heath Brothers, I mean, they go back a long way. These are pretty much purely acoustic musicians. And here they tried to update the sound a little bit. And I think maybe for a lot of people they would be disappointed. But it's kind of one of those albums that you go into with expectations, which I did. I mean, I knew the Heath Brothers and from various sidemen gigs they did, and certainly Percy Heath played with Miles Davis and people like that. But I kind of knew what I was buying, and I remember liking it very much. And I pulled this out recently, and I'm like, man, would I like to hear that again? Being on CBS Records, you know, it's a shame because CBS, I'm sure, while the record label's certainly around, but they kind of ignore jazz, and they're very bad at reissuing old things. And I have to wonder if this ever came out on CD, and if it did, it'd probably be pretty much unavailable now. But like I said, it's a 1981 recording of the Heath Brothers. Jimmy Heath on tenor and soprano saxophones. Good old Percy Heath on acoustic bass, and he actually plays cello on this as well. And Stanley Cowell on keyboards. And funny, I just saw Stanley Cowell on TV. There was a PBS special that was honoring, I guess it was that annual presidential awards for artists. And they were doing, oh man, I forget who the pianist is that they honored. Somebody who's been around a long time. Jazz pianist has been around a long time, and I forget who it was now. I can picture what he looks like, but I can't remember his name. He's quite elderly now. And they kind of did he got a presidential award, kind of like a Lifetime Achievement Award, but he wasn't able to make the performance as it was recorded. And Stanley Cowell came in and played one of this pianist's, there were a couple of this pianist pieces. Geez, I can't remember. I'm trying to remember who it is, and I can picture what the pianist looks like too. Ahmad Jamal. I think it was Ahmad Jamal who won the presidential award. I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. I think it was Ahmad Jamal. And unfortunately, Ahmad couldn't make the awards ceremony, which was a live performance. And, it might have even been a year ago. It might have been a rebroadcast I caught, but it was just something I saw literally a month ago. And Stanley Cowell came out and played some Ahmad Jamal pieces. I don't think anybody knew who Stanley Cowell was in the audience, but they weren't a jazz audience either. So he's on piano. There's Akira Tana on drums and percussion, not somebody I'm familiar with. And there's an electric guitarist, Anthony Perrone, on here, which is the thing that leads me to think, maybe a slightly modern thing, because I don't recall the electric guitar necessarily being just like a Wes Montgomery, Joe Pass, smooth jazz, real mainstream jazz kind of thing. And there's additional musicians on a couple tracks, which include background singers, which make me think, okay, this is a slight bid toward commerciality. A synthesizer player on 2 tracks, a second guitar player playing rhythm and lead guitar on these 2 tracks. It kind of leads me to think, and there's only 8 tracks on the album. So it kind of leads me to think that this was a slight, and I'm sure pushed by CBS Records, slight move in the more direction of a more accessible, you could say commercial, but I don't recall this really being like a funk record or anything. I still think it's a record that's highly enjoyable to jazz fans, but it's just not a pure mainstream album. And of course, Percy's not with us. Percy finally passed away. Percy Heath, the bass player. Is Jimmy Heath still with us? I'm not sure. Very, very possible. I haven't heard from him for a number of years, so I'm going to look him up. Whoa, he's still alive. He's 92. This is why I leave up Wikipedia. I got smart, and recently when I started doing these videos, I generally don't get on the internet at all with this computer, but I decided, well, since I'm randomly pulling things out, I bring up a Wikipedia page just so I can look something up for reasons like this. So Jimmy Heath is still around, 92. I don't know how active he is. But yeah, this I want to hear. Now, this is one of the albums. By the way, it's called Expressions of Life, and it's from 1981, the Heath Brothers. Yeah, this is one I want to hear again. But CBS Records are not very good with their jazz catalog, unfortunately. Okay, so I've been chatting along here for almost a half hour. Is this my last one of the year? I don't know. It's, as I'm recording this, it's December 1st. Can't believe the year's already coming to an end. I can't believe even Halloween is over still. I'm not over that. But, we do have a 60-degree day, supposedly, tomorrow. I kind of doubt that we're going to see maybe, temperatures like that anymore in December. But, you just never know. And if I do find a warm day, I will come back out here and I'll do another Tales from the Garage and vinyl pull. And then, when I'm inside, I can't do vinyl pulls. I'll continue to do videos, but I'll be doing things like my top 11 Kiss albums, as I promised, and all my favorite 12-inch singles from Justin Bieber. And I'm writing up a thing now, who's heavier, Black Sabbath or the Spice Girls? And the answer may surprise you. And I'm going to leave you with that teaser. And thanks for watching. And I'll be back either in here or out there or somewhere in between. Maybe in another room. Who knows? So I hope everybody's doing well. Take care. Tune in next time for more
Tales from the Garage.